United States President Donald Trump has signed an executive order cutting all funding to South Africa. He's accused the South African government of seizing Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation and offered them safe passage in the USA as refugees. Lobby groups AfriForum and Solidarity declined Trump's offer, saying they would like to help while staying at home. What does this mean for USA and South Africa relations going forward? And have we found ourselves in a diplomatic crisis? International relations expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela weighs in. Good morning, doctor, and thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, Ms. Chava. Thanks very much for the invitation.
Firstly, do you believe the U.S. has a legitimate reason to intervene in South Africa's domestic land reform policies?
Absolutely not. That's one of the sanctity of international relations, that no interference in the internal affairs of other countries. But in this case, it's unfortunate that the Americans have taken their decision based on false information. So you can see the world is changing, Ms. Chava. Peddling of fake news is becoming a reality and requires better management by all states around the world. So this did not come as a surprise, of course, that Trump is taking a hardline position towards South Africa, particularly following the visit by Netanyahu to the White House. That's when these things start trickling in.
So would you say then that the U.S. is unfairly leveraging its financial power to pressure South Africa on this matter?
Well, one of the biggest problems of Netanyahu, Ms. Chava, of Trump, is to realize that the world has changed since when he was last in the White House. There are new powers that have emerged. The power is evolving, amongst different states with different capabilities. And the position is taking is going to, in the long run, really affect America, not only related to South Africa. The trade war that is launching around the world, it's not good for the American economy too, particularly an economy that owes close to 36 trillion in debt. So it's going to be a big challenge.
In what ways will this decision affect the U.S.? Because there's been more talk about how it will affect the relations, more specifically on the South African end.
Well, the only thing that it does, it pushes South Africa to other power players around the world. Precisely what the Americans have been fearing, that South Africa should not align itself with countries like China, Russia, and Iran. So this decision leaves South Africa with no other alternative but to align itself with new emerging powers, even much stronger than before. So that's the damage that is going to be done to the US. But the biggest problem that we should be concerned about here in South Africa, Ms. Chava, is Donald Trump going to accept letters of credence from Ambassador Rasool? Now that Donald Trump is coming up with all excuses to nullify any decision that was made by Biden. Remember, the letters of credence for Ibrahim Rasool was accepted by the Biden administration. Now, 2 years ago, Trump has taken security clearance away from Biden, stating that he was not in a good mental state. Is he not going to make a similar excuse, given the fact that one of the biggest issues that Rasool will need to navigate, it's around South Africa's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now we know the position that Americans have taken. So Rasool may become a ceremonial ambassador there with no function, because the White House will be out of touch for him, even if they accept his letters of credence. The State Department, he'll be relegated to the most junior people. But at the Capitol Hill too, he's not going to have easy access as he used to. So those are implications that we need to weigh moving forward in terms of having an effective ambassador there. But this is because of the position, the disruptive positions that Donald Trump is making, not only South Africa, around the world. He has no allies now. He's taking decisions against his allies. So who are we? I mean, if he can take a decision against Canada, his immediate neighbor, what's South Africa? So many thousands of kilometers away.
How do you think that this will impact the South African-US relationship in the long run, and also in light of the fact that Trump recently announced that he will not be attending the G20 summit?
Well, Trump, I haven't seen a pronouncement in terms of attending the G20. But I think what Secretary Rubio made not to attend the foreign ministers here and stating the basic theme of the G20, because the question of solidarity, equality, and equity are contained in the theme that South Africa has crafted for the G20. It's a prelude, in my own view, for Trump not to attend, to raise similar concern. Remember, Trump has reversed anything that has to do with equity in the United States, anything that has to do with equal treatment of people. He's taken that away. So he's unlikely to attend. I think he's going to come up with excuses not to attend the G20. And the G20 without the US will be unfortunate, because the US remains a very strong power around the world. That's one issue. So we'll need to see how, as we move forward, they navigate this matter, Ms. Cham.
And what are your thoughts on the US's plan to resettle white South African farmers as refugees? I mean, although AfriForum and Solidarity have come out to say they don't want to go, they've declined the offer.
The Afrikaners have a nice slogan to say, "Abur as ni abur sonarabaki." I don't know how they're going to function in Texas. They're unlikely to accept the bait. The Afrikaners are well entrenched. Their histories in this country, their languages in this country. They're unlikely to accept moving to a country as a refugee. And remember, the danger of this, Ms. Chava, is that Donald Trump is going to be in the White House for 4 years. The next president may revoke his presidential orders and say, these are not classical refugees, let them be repatriated back to South Africa. It will be too late for that. But I think Afrikaners are wise enough not to accept this. They would understand this is a rivalry of big power that is trying to assert itself because of its waning power around the world. They are unlikely to accept this. I mean, do you really see Johan Rupert migrating to Texas there and becoming a refugee in the United States? That's unlikely to happen.
Now, do you think it would be beneficial, Doctor, for President Ramaphosa to meet with AfriForum and Labour Group Solidarity, as they plan to do, to iron out policy differences?
I think he should. As president, he has the responsibility to meet everyone in the country, even people who don't agree with him. And literally, in my own view, Ms. Chaba, to deal with this question of South Africans, we have a tendency to really demolish our own nation brand. And we so depend on it. Our prosperity and future depends on the credibility of our brand as a country. And have this dialogue with them, because some of this peddling of false information emanates from within South Africa. And I think it would be very useful to have this dialogue and discussions with them and show the implications, because what they are doing essentially, they're cutting their nose to despise their face, because they are highly involved. Their constituency are in the farming industry. If the United States imposes tariffs on South African agricultural produce, it's going to have serious ramification on them. And I think they're starting to realize that. That's why you're hearing voices that Donald Trump shouldn't punish the country, should punish leaders of the ANC, because all of a sudden it has dawned on them that this is likely to have serious ramification on their own constituency.
And Doctor, do you think that President Ramaphosa's SONA comments regarding seeking assistance elsewhere and resisting bullying would lead to a renegotiation or restructuring of South Africa's trade agreements?
Well, AGOA, it's likely not to see the day. Remember, Ms. Chava, it's due for renewal this year. So I think South Africa needs to diversify its economic interests across the world, particularly given the fact that you have this multipolarity that is starting to emerge with different benefits for the country. It's pushing South Africa there, and South Africa has to start accepting the fact that the US is not the sole power, and they can't only deal with the US, and they must deal with the US on their own terms as South Africans, because you can't deal with dictates from the United States to tell you what to do and what not to do. No one tells the Americans what to do, what not to do. So that's what's going to create a huge problem. But of course, standing up to these bullies is going to take a lot of guts, and it's going to take all South Africans to rally behind the president, in my own view, to support him to stand up to these bullies across the political divide. I've seen really toned down rhetoric from his coalition partners like the DA and so on. And some of the people were very critical, like Herman Mashaba. They've toned down their rhetoric because all of a sudden people are realizing this is going to really seriously affect the country, the trade that we're having with the US. We need to find markets for this produce.
Do you perhaps feel that China might capitalize on the situation to strengthen economic relations with South Africa?
You know, ironically, when Marco Rubio announced that he's not coming for the ministers' meeting, China made a statement, and I think they met with South African government ministers to say they are entirely behind South Africa's support. So the US loss would definitely be the Chinese gain and other powers that are emerging. You know, one thing, Mashaba, that Donald Trump, I think he has to realize, 4 years ago, when he was in the White House, the world was totally different. Now, the world is absolutely different. And if he doesn't accept the fact that he's not the only power in the world, I'm afraid it's going to affect the US, because China has imposed, for instance, sanction on what is called the rare earths. This is about 17 strategic minerals that everyone needs around the world. And if Donald Trump doesn't realize that China holds a sway, because they control about, I think, 76% or 78% of the rare earths, and really getting into this trade war with China and everyone else, including his own allies in Europe, is going to be very detrimental to the US economy. And the US economy that is struggling to pick up is going to have a serious ramification.
And what implications could the situation have for South Africa's trade relations with the EU and other African nations?
Well, South Africa has been having steady trade with the EU. If you look at the dealings with the EU, you don't see this extraterritoriality behavior that we're seeing in the US that tells South Africa, you do this, this is what our law says. The EU has been very civil in terms of dealing with South Africa and raising its concerns in any policy matter or any differences that it may have with South Africa. So it deals with this totally different. And there's an understanding that this relationship between South Africa and EU is symbiotic. There's interdependence in terms of the dealings. So that's one issue. The other issue is that there's an appetite for South African mineral resources, for South African goods around the world, South African agricultural produce around the world, and particularly in China too. You may have seen during the last meeting of Africa-China, I think it was Minister Steenhuisen who really indicated how South African farmers can penetrate the US market. So there's an effort in terms of accessing these big markets. India, it's another huge market that we've been having good relationship. Brazil, it's another one. So there are huge markets around the world that South Africa can deal with. The only problem that South Africa has to manage, Maschara, is this idea that the American can impose sanction and say, you can't buy Iranian oil, even though Iranian oil is cheaper. South Africa should stand up to that and say, this is nothing to do with the US. It has to do with our needs, and stand up to that.
And do you think that there is a communication breakdown between Washington and the union buildings, especially considering how bizarre the communication flow has been?
I don't think it's a communication breakdown, Maschal. It's a deliberate and intentional position that has been taken by the Trump administration, very hostile towards South Africa, and mainly based on two issues. The perception that South Africa is acting against US security interests and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Those are the issues that are framing the relation. Before Trump came into office, I actually had a view that these two issues would disappear because Trump, during the campaign, made it quite clear that he wants to end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He wants to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which were the two issues that were framing the relations in the past between South Africa and the US, and different legislation that are likely to come up to really censure South Africa were based on mainly these two issues. Now that he has really retracted his position on particularly the Middle East issue, we are yet to see how is he going to deal with the one that speaks to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because it seems there is a totally different approach.
In closing, Doctor, what strategies can South Africa employ to mitigate any potential economic fallout and promote greater economic resilience and stability at this moment?
You know, in this country, we have two centers for American studies, one at the University of Pretoria, the other one at the University of Wits. But they came too late, because within the academia here, there's never been a center to understand the American power and to understand how to mitigate and advise government on how to mitigate American power and to minimize the likely consequences of any decision that the Americans made. Now, this is the time the government would have to start really looking into how to mitigate the American power and how to control American power to a certain extent in terms of South Africa, so that the American must not take any decision that would have serious consequences on us. We need to understand their policy. We need to know how to deal with that. One of the biggest and the strong thing in the United States, the US works on the basis of lobbying. And during the anti-apartheid years, we had a good network of people that we lobbied, local elected officials who take certain positions. I mean, even the Republicans who took positions that were really against the White House because of the power of the society. So we need to reconnect with those constituencies to see how they're going to help South Africa to navigate, particularly the challenges in the next 4 years. We don't know if this will be permanent, but at least for the next 4 years, we're expecting a very hostile policies from Washington.
Doctor, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Ms. Sheva.
That was international relations expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela.